Hello everybody and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm your host Eric and this is the show where we're trying to review every movie ever made. Starting today with Inconceivable. Now, get ready. You ready for this? Here's some real hacky movie reviewing. Watching this movie would be inconceivable. This was pretty bad. It's not that bad, but it's pretty bad. This is a recent Nick Cage movie, and if you're familiar with recent Nick Cage movies, you know that by and large, they're not very good. And this one is part of that one. And here's the thing, Nick Cage is also barely in it. This one is a surrogacy thriller. What do I mean by that? I mean that Nick Cage is married to Gina Gershon. And listen, we here at Every Movie Ever, we love Gina Gershon. We also love Nick Cage, just wish they were in a better movie. And they want to have a baby, and for whatever reason, they've had to hire a surrogate. And the surrogate in this movie is played by an actress named Nikki Whelan. And what ends up happening is a sort of whole hand that rocks the cradle spin on surrogacy, where Nikki Whelan wants to, drive Gina Gershon crazy and get her out of the picture so she can marry Nick Cage and she can have the family and blackmail, etc., etc., etc. It is, however, somewhat effective. It is effective-ish. It is, while not a very good movie, there is something about that whole hand that rocks the cradle scenario and turning it on its head that little bit, making it about surrogacy more so than a kid that's already there, that does amp the suspense up a little bit. And it is well made enough that sort of works. It just is never quite there. It's one of those movies where it's hard to put your finger on what's ineffective about it, and perhaps it's that it's all a little bit warmed over. Perhaps that it as a movie is somewhat unambitious, and so the thrills only are ever so thrilling. But whatever the reason, Inconceivable never quite gets there. 2.5 stars. Up next, Hotel for Dogs. Now this is a movie, if there has ever been a movie that is more described by its title, I don't know it. Planet of the Apes, I guess, but Hotel for Dogs, it is exactly what it says on the tin, folks. It is a movie about a hotel for dogs, as a couple of teens, tweens, whatever they are, they find an abandoned hotel that they spruce up so that stray dogs can live in this abandoned hotel. If that sounds to you like a movie you want to see, then Hotel for Dogs is a movie for you. It is literally, there is no greater in the history of movies marriage between a movie title and the movie. Hotel for Dogs. That is what you are getting here in every conceivable sense. If you say to yourself, oh, that doesn't sound like a great movie, you're right, it's not. It's not a great movie. If you say to yourself, oh, that sounds like a movie about a hotel filled with dogs, you're right. I don't know, there's not really a lot to say about it. It is not particularly interesting or exciting. It is that movie. If you think you want to see a movie about a hotel that is for dogs, this is the best movie about a hotel for dogs that you can see. 2.5 stars. Whereas Hotel for Dogs is a movie that is very much what it says on the tin, Doubt is a movie that, you're probably going to need to read a description of to figure out what a movie called Doubt would be about. But here's the thing. You know what it's about? It's about Doubt. Doubt follows a couple of nuns working at a Catholic school in what I think is the 1950s. And talk about heavy-hitting acting talent here, as your two nuns are played by the always tremendous Meryl Streep in a very great Meryl Streep performance, and Amy Adams in a very great Amy Adams performance. And if you're thinking older nun, younger nun, you're absolutely right, as Meryl Streep plays the, Mother Superior or whatever, to Amy Adams, not quite a novitiate, but younger, more naive nun, and they end up dealing with a problem, and that problem is, and a little bit of a trigger warning here, Philip Seymour Hoffman is the local parish priest, and he might be doing inappropriate things with the young men of the parish. And that's the core of the movie, is that might. Meryl Streep is pretty sure that things are going on, and certainly Amy Adams is pretty sure that things are going on, but for a variety of reasons, including the power structure of the Catholic Church and the way the whole thing is built, so that it is, protects the priests, it is impossible for Meryl Streep to know for sure, and that is her doubt. It's a movie that really resonates. It really gets to the heart of assault, not just in the 50s, but to today, and with the doubt at the core of it, and how that's a problem, with how the absoluteness that society, and certainly myself, desires is difficult to find in this sort of cases, and the problem with figuring out what the best course of action to proceed with is. This is a movie that attacks those facets of it with a very adult mindset and a very sophisticated reasoning. It's hard to say if the resolution in this movie is satisfactory insofar as, what ends up happening to Philip Seymour Hoffman and what Meryl Streep is able to accomplish. But it is at the very least realistic. It is a movie that tackles the whole issue, in as much of a mature manner as I think that you could hope for, and everybody is acting it out of the park. Doubt, it's a real terrific movie that really gets to the heart of the issues, and again to the heart of what is so difficult about dealing with an act that is so vile, but that need to know. I feel like I'm tripping over myself a little bit in this review. Suffice to say, Doubt is a terrific movie about the vagaries around evil. And let's say that. And let's say that Doubt is 4 stars. Up next, we're calling all horror hounds. All right, horror hounds, we are headed back to the Critters franchise for Critters 2. Now, I am new to the Critters franchise. I like the iconography of the Critters franchise. I like the attitude of the Critters franchise, where it's a little bit jokey. I like the Critters. And I would love to love these Critters movies, but here's the problem. I don't. They're good, but they just kind of stop at good. And Critters 2 is kind of more of the same as what Critters was. Alien bounty hunters, the same alien bounty hunters, have returned to Earth to deal with critters that didn't die. The new thing in Critters 2 is the critter ball, which is pretty terrific, where a ton of critters jam together into a big Indiana Jones type ball to come at you and eat you. This movie's still silly, and the silliness is where it really thrives. In addition to all of that samey stuff from the first Critters movie, you add the great Eddie Deason nerding it up as a fast food employee in this one. Remember the alien bounty hunters, they can shapeshift, and now one of the alien bounty hunters has decided to be an alien babe, and they get some pretty good, actually, traction out of that, where this time the bounty hunter gets his reference for what to look like from a Playboy, and so when he changes his body into the shape of the lady from the magazine, he or she has a staple in their stomach. That's pretty funny because of anyway. Critters 2, not a lot to say about it, not a ton to recommend about it. It's not bad, but it's not that great. 3 stars. Now it's time for Docurama. This week on Docurama, we're looking at Icarus, a recent documentary that I believe won an Oscar? I think so. This movie is, in its way, it is kind of all over the place, but not necessarily in a bad way. It is a movie that starts as a documentary about competitive cycling and bike racing, like Lance Armstrong and the Tour de France. And it is a movie that is very much about juicing. In the wake of the revelation that Lance Armstrong had been, taking drugs to improve his performance for so long, this is a movie where the documentarian wants to do a bike race and really look into juicing and actually experiment on himself with the juicing to see what the whole thing is. The movie starts out feeling kind of disjointed and a little bit aimless, and it follows, like I say, our documentarian, a guy named Brian Fogel, as he is, he's kind of doing a Super Size Me about taking drugs and riding bikes. When it becomes engrossing is when it takes a little bit of a left turn and becomes about a Russian doping scandal, wherein we find out about how the Russian government has, allegedly at least, been doping all, or at least a large number of its Olympic athletes across a number of sports for decades, and the lengths that they have gone to hide this from the Olympic and world community. At that point, the movie becomes pretty interesting. And much like the movie Doubt, where we reviewed earlier in this movie, is somewhat plagued by an unknowing. By that, there's only so much that we can prove here, and what can we do about that? And while Doubt really makes hay from that and really is able to turn that moral quandary into a centerpiece of a movie, here ends up being a little bit frustrating because, we as people, we crave a resolution. And Icarus is a documentary without much of a resolution. And whereas Doubt is able to make that irresolution central to itself, Icarus is never able to make it so central to itself that the lack of resolution becomes itself satisfying. I don't know, maybe that was all a bunch of BS. I don't know. But that is why I'm giving Icarus, almost fell over. That is why I'm giving Icarus 3.5 stars. Let's get spaced out. This week on Spaced Out, we are looking at the lighter side of science fiction with Coneheads. This is a movie that I am sure I have seen repeatedly. I know I watched it several times as a younger man. It is the feature film adaptation of the Saturday Night Live sketch where Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin are aliens with Coneheads. This is a movie that, like I said, I watched it a number of times. Here's the deal. It is not a funny movie. There is nothing about Coneheads, about the premise or the movie, that is in any way funny or humorous. But it is still somehow strangely watchable in a way that, oddly, many Dan Aykroyd movies are. And to Dan Aykroyd, I say to you, why? I say to you, why about your whole life, your whole career, but this movie in particular? Like, why did you think that this thin premise could be stretched into a movie? And what is going on in your head that the weirder aspects of this movie were born there? Like, for some reason, you felt the need to show us a conehead butt in this movie, and how the butt in and of itself has little, like, antennas on it. Dan, why? Why all the teeth? Why all the everything? But again, he must be right about something, because again, this movie is somewhat watchable. It is also interesting to look at in that it is an absolute who's who of Saturday Night Live alums. Not only do you have Aykroyd and Curtin in this movie, you've got Adam Sandler is in this movie. Chris Farley has a very large role in this movie. David Spade is in this movie. Michael McKean is in this movie. Tons and tons and tons and tons of SNL alums are in it. So, is it a movie that's worth watching? Yeah, but mostly as a curiosity. Mostly as a movie so that you can go, oh, him? And also, what? Which is why Coneheads gets 2.5 stars. And now, after weeks away, it is time to once again open the Columbo Files. This week on the Columbo Files, we are looking at Murder with Too Many Notes. This is very late period Columbo. I believe it's one of the last Columbo TV movies to come out of the 90s. And ironically, I think my first Columbo. For whatever reason, I have and I've always had a very distinct memory of getting excited for and watching this particular Columbo movie when it first aired on television. I don't know why, but I think the reason may be our guest murderer this week. And this week, our guest murderer is Mr. Billy Connolly, the great, Scottish comedian who I have, since I was a young man, always loved for some reason. What is that reason? I don't know. Maybe it was his stint on Head of the Class, although I more distinctly remember his own short-lived sitcom that I think was called Billy and may have been a part of TGIF. I don't know. Here's the thing though, as we've talked about many times, 90s Columbo is lesser Columbo. But Billy Connolly brings a lot of camp energy here to his role as a music conductor for movies, for movie music, who is turned murderous as he becomes jealous of his protege's talent while his own talent wanes. A sort of Amadeus by way of Columbo. It is a fun movie that, if we're being honest, the ending is much too theatrical the ultimate revelation of how the murder was done and all of that. It's all very big in an unnecessary way. And if we're being honest, ultimately, Billy Connolly gets taken down and tricked by Columbo much too easily for my taste. This is a fun, campy one, if we're being honest. And if you're going to sit down and watch a 90s Columbo, this is the one that I recommend probably more than any others. Although, man, that weird one where he goes to the Playboy Mansion is also pretty silly. Murder with Too Many Notes, 3 stars. And now let's head over to the Christmas corner. Hey folks, welcome back to the Christmas Corner. Pull up a seat by the fire as we talk about a new Hallmark Christmas movie. This one, Christmas Joy. Now this one got picked out because of the star, in this case, Danielle, I want to say Panabaker. Danielle Panabaker, who we all know as she plays Caitlin Snow / Killer Frost on the CW's Flash show. And particularly when she's in Killer Frost mode, is one of the best parts of that show. Here, she's fine. It's a very standard Hallmark Christmas movie, which at this point, now that I've seen way too many of these things, they are starting to become very formulaic. In this one, it's the same old story where Danielle Panabaker is a successful executive in a big city who comes back to her small town, gets involved in a cookie crawl where you have to bake a bunch of cookies for a party, and a gingerbread cook-off, which to my mind is one too many things for her in the plot to be involved with. And in doing so, relearns the joy of small town life as she falls in love with her hospital administrator boyfriend. The problem with Christmas Joy and with so many of these Hallmark movies, like I say, is that formula. So many of these movies seem to be targeted not at people my age, which is fine. Movies should not necessarily be aimed solely at white guys in their mid-30s. This seems to be targeted at moms who are in their 50s, who are frustrated that their daughters have moved out of the house and become successful in the big city. And when are they going to come back and visit? And why don't they just live here? That seems to be the attitude of every Hallmark movie, as inevitably the successful woman is coerced into giving up her successful lifestyle and any joy that she may have there. And let me tell you something, if these movies are to be believed, no successful businesswoman is ever happy and relearn the joy of small town life. I don't know. I am taking a systemic frustration out on this dumb little movie. Christmas Joy, I don't know. It's watchable. It's 2 stars. Now it's time for nobody's favorite part of the show. This is the worst of the week. This week's worst of the week is 1959's The Mummy. This is the Hammer Studios remake of the Universal Studios' The Mummy. Now, we have talked many times on this show about how my favorite kind of a movie monster is a mummy. I love a mummy. And the problem is there are not very many good mummy movies. Well, the Hammer Studio, which dominated horror in the early 60s, their stuff, I always want to like a Hammer movie more than I actually do. Partially because they look great. The way they approach, Gothic horror with Technicolor really creates some lurid looking stuff. And these movies have just the right amount, just a little dab, a teaspoon, a half a teaspoon of exploitation in them to make them, to make you, if you're flipping channels, to make it look like this is a movie that I bet is a lot of fun. The problem is that they often get really stodgy and boring, that they tend to emphasize the wrong parts of the plot so that they're not terribly thrilling and action-oriented, but get a little navel-gazy about sitting around a table and talking about, I don't know, books and I don't know, whatever, you know, being real heady about the horror, as opposed to the visceralness that you want out of a movie that looks the way that it does with that bright red blood. You just want more blood, and what you end up getting is a bunch of British guys sitting around a table talking about what they ought to do, as opposed to watching them do it. So, The Mummy is a real victim of, just as Christmas Joy is a victim of Hallmark Christmas formula, The Mummy, which is only like the third or fourth real Hammer horror movie, is in and of itself already a victim of the Hammer formula. That said, there are good things about this. Christopher Lee makes a fine mummy, and there is a lot of mummy action in this movie. You know, while I love the original Universal Mummy, my problem with it is that outside of the opening scene, there's not a lot of an actual mummy shambling around in this movie. In 1959's Hammer's The Mummy, we get a lot of that guy being a mummy. And there's a pretty good part where the mummy gets a big hole blasted out of the middle of him and is still going. That is pretty good. But it's all so samey. It all just feels so retread. The other thing this one gets right is an extended Egyptian flashback. In Universal's The Mummy, we get a little bit of a flashback and some allusion to Kerim Bey's life in ancient Egypt. Here, we spend a lot of time in ancient Egypt. Maybe even too much time, but at least that's different and a little bit interesting. That said, though, even those, the Christopher Lee-ness, the mumminess of it, cannot overcome the doldrums of it, which is why I'm giving The Mummy 2 stars. Now it's time for the best of the bunch. This week's best of the bunch is Attack the Block. And here's what I have to say to Attack the Block. Where have you been all my life, Attack the Block? Now listen, Attack the Block. This is my fault, girl. You've been out there, I've been hearing about you. All my friends have said, hey, when are you going to look up this Attack the Block? Everybody talks about you on the internet, and everybody says, girl, you're a great movie. You're smart and fun and exciting with good science fiction and good action. Why was I ignoring you for so long? I don't know. But I finally got around to seeing Attack the Block. I watched it on my birthday. I threw myself a John Boyega birthday by watching The Last Jedi and Attack the Block, John Boyega's first movie and the movie that brought him to the attention of the people casting Star Wars. And having a Star Wars in this movie isn't enough. We also get a Doctor Who in that current Doctor Who, Jodie Whittaker. This is one of her first big roles. And let me tell you something, Boyega and Whittaker are both killing it. Here's the thing, this is such a great premise, one of those premises that is original of this movie, but is one of those, why wasn't this a movie already? Aliens land on Earth. Stay with me. But where they land is outside of a British, apartment block. So that you have essentially a gang of British street toughs deciding to defend their home against these aliens. The aliens are great and original. They're these big, hairy monsters that are pitch black, so you never get to see any detail to them. Only when they open their jaws and you see this like kind of neon blue mouth do you get to see anything. It's very cool looking. The action is contained and exciting and thrilling. The stakes, like we talked about with Die Hard last week, feel very real because instead of this being, scientists dealing with an alien invasion across all of England, it's all so limited to this one, housing block that everything is contained and real and feels, honest and visceral. They're also very smart in aping a sort of a John Carpenter style sound to this movie so that aurally it is also very exciting and interesting and, very much up my street, very much the kind of thing I like. The movie was directed by Joe Cornish. It's his first movie, and for a long time his only movie. Only recently, with a movie that came out a couple weeks ago as we're taping this, The Kid Who Would Be King, has Joe Cornish done another movie. I'm excited to see that one. But Attack the Block is one heck of a feature film debut. It is a confident movie, a very confident and thoughtful but visceral and exciting genre entry that I'm very excited for whatever Joe Cornish is ever going to do. It's a movie that makes the most of its location, that makes the most of its creatures, that makes the most of its cast. If you, like me, have been sleeping on Attack the Block, knock it off and go see it. This is such a vital movie and such an exciting one that you are not going to regret a moment of it. Attack the Block, 4 stars. So that is going to do it for Every Movie Ever. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back next time as we keep trying to review every movie ever made. And don't forget to visit our website, northmetrotv.com/everymovieever. There, you can watch reviews of every movie we've ever covered here on the show, as well as complete episodes. That's northmetrotv.com/everymovieever.